Welcome back to the tutorial for the new Canaan Champion Tree project. We're going to be talking about how to measure a tree's circumference. And so for this project, we're interested in learning about the tree's circumference in inches. And to measure this in your citizen science kit, you have a tape measure. The interesting thing about this tape measure is that it's got two different measurements on it. The first is traditional inches, just like you'd have on a normal tape measure. And that's what we're going to be using for this project. But on the other side, we have measurements already converted to diameter. The reason for that is that foresters use diameter as a measure for trees instead of circumference. And so this is a forestry measurement tape, so that's what we opted for with this kit. But just use the regular inch tape measure. And if you have a regular tape measure at home, you can use that one as well. And when we're measuring a tree circumference, I mentioned sort of standard forestry practices earlier. One of those is the height at which we measure a tree. And we measure it at a height of 4.5 feet, which is also referred to as DBH, or diameter at breast height. In our case, it's more circumference at breast height. And the reason for that is that 4.5 feet is about chest height for most folks. And in a case like this, we've got a pretty sort of normal looking tree. It's got one trunk going straight up and down. So all we're gonna do is wrap this measuring tape around the tree at a height of 4.5 feet. Depending on the size of your tree, you might need a hand with it, but I'll see if I can manage this myself. Oh, maybe not. The other thing you can do is kind of walk your tape measure around and then shimmy it up the tree. And so when we're taking our measurement, we want to ensure that the tape measure is parallel, or I guess is perpendicular with the trunk of the tree. So if this tree had a slight lean, we would adjust the tape measure to go along with that lean. And we also want to make sure that the tape measure is a consistent 4.5 feet above the ground so that there's no sort of sag in it at any point around the tree. So we'll sort of shimmy things here, get it at the right height. And if we zoom in here, we'll see that this tree has a circumference of 80.5 inches. So that's what we'll record on our data sheet, 80.5 inches. Now, as I mentioned, this is a sort of normal looking tree, and you'll definitely run into situations as you measure a couple of trees where you have a tree that has more than one trunk, or maybe has some branches lower down. And the easiest way to think about this is imagine a tree having a sort of hourglass shape. And so part of the reason that we measure 4.5 feet above the ground is because we don't want the root flare of the trees. If we measured really down low, we'd start to get some of this flaring incorporated into our measurement because the roots of the tree naturally go out. And so that's sort of the bottom part of our hourglass shape that I had mentioned. And as a tree branches, usually that's, or if it has multiple trunks, that you can imagine being the sort of the top half of the hourglass shape. And what we want to do is measure that skinniest part in that, the flare from the trunks as well as the flare from the roots. And in some cases, that's not 4.5 feet off the ground. So if your tree has that sort of hourglass shape to it, try to measure that narrowest spot of the tree at whatever height that might be below 4.5 feet. So if this tree were to have another big branch coming out here and was kind of flared and there was a lot of wood right here, I would take my circumference measurement down here because that would be the narrowest part of the tree. There's a couple diagrams in the citizen science kit that you've been provided that sort of illustrate a couple oddities that'll hopefully help you kind of figure out where the right place to measure the tree is. But overall, pretty straightforward. Feel free to send us an email if you've got questions. And thanks for tuning in. Our next video is going to be about measuring tree height.